I'm Nora Bennett, 34 years old, and the morning that changes everything starts with the soft thud of an elevator door and the shine of a marble hallway that feels colder than February in Chicago. My phone buzzes in my coat pocket, a tight reminder that I'm expected in conference room C at 10 sharp. My heels click steady and measured, even though the muscles in my back want to lock, and the old ache behind my left eye threatens to bloom. The receptionist nods without a smile and points right, like this is just another Tuesday and not the one where my adoptive mother plans to talk me out of my inheritance. I think of a chessboard, black and white squares stretching forward, and of the woman who taught me how not to rush a move. I think of the number $2.5 million and how a number can make people forget their manners. I push the heavy door and catch in the glass my own face set like a calm lake before a storm. I'm ready to sit down, listen, and finally stop letting other people name what I deserve. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your ground when someone treated you like you didn't belong. I grew up learning how to make myself useful, the kind of useful that keeps you invited but never seated at the head of the table. At 8 years old, I came to the Caldwell house with a plastic bag of clothes and a scuffed teddy bear, the social worker's hand warm on my shoulder, and my name written on masking tape so it wouldn't be misplaced. Diane called me a good deed for the first month and practical for the next 20. Practical meant I shared a converted laundry room and kept quiet when company came. Practical meant I learned to sew a button plan, a week of meals from coupons, and strip a bed in under 2 minutes. Kindness in my mind wasn't big speeches or grand gestures. It was finishing the last shift on a Sunday, so the older nurse could get to church on time, slipping a warm tray to the night janitor, who always missed the cafeteria hours, remembering to call a patient's daughter at lunch because she worried. I didn't have much, and I can't say I wanted much, but I had a sense of what was right, and I knew how to stretch a dollar. That set me apart under Diane's roof, where Aaron got a used BMW at 16 to teach responsibility, and Brooke wore a gold bracelet to Thanksgiving so heavy it left a mark on her wrist. The Caldwell's world ran on reputation and convenience, a polish that showed up in country club photos, monogrammed napkins, and a habit of counting quickly when the bill arrived. Mine ran on time cards, thrift stores, and little jars where I kept cash for school books, bus fare, and the occasional treat of a good pair of scrubs that didn't scratch. I learned early that money, when you have it, smooths everything, and when you don't, you get blamed for the crease. When I was 19, Aaron's college fund absorbed a surprise technology fee, and Diane announced there wasn't enough left for me to start at the state university. She said community college would build character, and when I made the dean's list, she said I must be taking easy classes. By 21, I was pulling back-to-back weekend shifts at the hospital, saving for nursing school, and I still bought my own textbook used with notes in the margins from someone who had highlight preferences I learned to ignore. It wasn't that I expected help. It was the way a certain kind of smile could turn into a ledger, the way the word family could come with a price tag I never got to set. Margaret Ellis changed the temperature of that house the moment she moved in. Everyone called her Maggie, but she liked that I asked first and stuck with what she preferred. Where Diane saw a mouth to feed, Maggie saw a person. Where Martin chuckled and called me the stray, Maggie introduced me as her granddaughter to anyone who opened a door. She lived in the bright room at the end of the hall with the built-in shelves and the little brass lamp that made her hair look like spun silver in the evenings. She kept a chess set on a low table between 2 chairs and taught me to watch the board. Not the noise if you wait, she'd say, the play will show you the truth. With her, I learned patience that felt nothing like surrender. I learned that a gentle voice can hold a line stronger than a raised one. I learned that love, given quietly and consistently, can build a spine. When Maggie's health turned and I shifted my schedule to sleep in a chair by her bed, I didn't keep account of hours, and I didn't call attention to the little things she liked, the way she preferred her tea with a slice of orange, the wool throw at her feet, when the air vent drafted the music low and steady, when the house fell into its nightly hush. Diane called it hovering, the word floating like a perfume bottle that had been left uncapped too long, and Martin called it inappropriate, which told me more about his comfort than mine. Still, I held steady. Still, I went to work, charted carefully, came home to Maggie's room, and listened to the soft click of chess pieces even when we were too tired to play. When she passed the house filled with casseroles and condolences, and for a week kindness felt easy for everyone. Then the reading of the will brought its own weather one that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with what Maggie left in my name. I didn't ask for the number they couldn't stop repeating. I didn't ask for a change in how they said my name. I asked for space to breathe to handle paperwork without having to explain myself, and for a moment after the funeral, it seemed like that might be possible. But a month later, Diane called with a time and an address, her tone bright as cut glass, and said we should handle this like adults. When I stepped into the downtown office and saw Aaron on one side and Brooke on the other, both straight-backed in their suits, when I caught a glimpse of Martin's leather folder and a set of white envelopes with tabs peeking out, something old tightened behind my ribs. The door clicked shut, and Diane smiled as if she were hosting. She gestured to a chair at the far end where the papers were already arranged, yellow flags marking where a pen would go, and asked me to sit so we could make this simple. The chair Diane pointed to felt more like a witness stand than a seat at a family meeting. The light above the long, polished table caught on every piece of silver in the room, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the air vent and the sound of papers being adjusted. Diane sat at the head, her posture sharp, her pearl earrings steady, as if she'd practiced this in a mirror. Martin was to her right, his reading glasses perched halfway down his nose. Aaron leaned back with one arm stretched across the back of his chair, trying for casual while Brooke scrolled through her phone until Diane gave her a look that froze her hand mid-swipe. Across from them were 3 men in gray suits, each with a folder, each watching me with the kind of polite detachment that said, this was business, not family. Nora Diane said, her voice dipped in that false warmth she used for holiday guests. Thank you for coming. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly. She slid a page toward me, the sound of the paper soft but final. My eyes caught the heading immediately. Transfer of inheritance rights. Her tone didn't match the words. It's a simple form, she added, to make things smoother for everyone. I picked up the page but didn't read it yet. The edges were sharp under my fingers. You brought lawyers? I said quietly. Martin smiled the way he did when he thought he was being reasonable. This isn't adversarial, Nora. It's preventative. We all want to make sure Margaret's wishes are carried out fairly. The sum involved is substantial, and frankly, the rest of the family has a stake in it. Aaron cleared his throat. Look, it's not like anyone's saying you shouldn't get something, he said, his words measured, but $2.5 million. While Mom's company is stretched thin and Brooke can't even find work. That's not fair. Brooke nodded, her hair falling in perfect waves. You already have a job, Nora. You're doing fine. You don't need that kind of money. Grandma must have been confused. The words landed like pebbles tossed into a well small but deep enough to echo. I kept my face still. She wasn't confused, I said. She knew exactly what she was doing. Diane's smile never faltered. Sweetheart, no one is accusing her of being senile. But we all know how she got toward the end, forgetful, emotional, easily influenced. You were with her constantly, and well, sometimes that kind of closeness can cloud a person's judgment. Martin leaned forward, clasping his hands. Courts see this all the time. A caregiver ends up with the entire estate, and the biological family is left out. Judges tend to overturn those wills. The law has to protect against undue influence. The phrase biological family hit like a familiar bruise. It had been their favorite distinction since I was old enough to understand what it meant. I looked down at the neat stack of papers, the yellow tabs lined up like little warnings. My pulse ticked steady in my throat. And if I don't sign this, I asked. Diane's smile thinned. Then we'll have no choice but to file for a formal review. It's not something I want to do, but it could get very public and very unpleasant for you. Her voice softened, as if she were offering mercy, not a threat. Martin added, an investigation like that could put your nursing license at risk. Elder care accusations are serious, Nora. You don't want that cloud over you. I felt the room tilt slightly, the air closing in. They had rehearsed this, every line, every angle. Aaron slid the pen toward me. Just sign it, he said. We can settle it quietly. No lawyers, no headlines. You don't even like the attention." I set the pen back on the table. "You've already brought lawyers," I said. "This isn't quiet." One of the gray-suited men finally spoke, his tone efficient. "Ms. Bennett, this is a voluntary transfer. If you agree now, the matter ends here. If not, we'll have to proceed with claims of elder influence and potential financial manipulation." The word abuse hovered unsaid, but I could hear it in the careful space he left between sentences. Diane nodded approvingly at him, then turned to me. "No one wants this to get ugly, darling. Let's be adults about it." I remembered being 14, standing in that same tone when she told me I couldn't join the family photo because the color palette was already set. I'd stood off to the side that day, holding her purse and smiling so my tears wouldn't show. Now, as she repeated that same condescending sweetness, something inside me steadied instead of shrinking. "You've been planning this for a while," I said. It wasn't a question. Aaron shifted in his chair. "We found out about the will 6 months ago," he admitted. "We just want what's fair. 6 months, the exact time since Maggie's funeral." They'd been waiting for the right stage. Martin opened his folder and tapped the edge of a document. "We have case law on our side. Once the court sees the relationship and the sudden shift in distribution, it will be obvious she was manipulated. We're simply saving everyone the trouble of a drawn-out process." Diane adjusted her pearl earring. "Sign it, Nora. You're not losing anything that really belongs to you. This is about family. We supported you for 24 years. The word supported carried the weight of every cold dinner I'd eaten alone, every school trip I'd skipped, every time I'd been told to be grateful." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "You kept receipts, didn't you?" Diane's eyes flickered. "Excuse me?" "Receipts," I repeated. "For every penny you spent on me." Brooke gave a little laugh. "Of course she did. Mom's organized." Aaron frowned. "That's not the point. The point is, you owe us some decency after everything we did for you." Martin leaned back again, confident, seeing the conversation as something already won. "You can't win this, Nora. You'll lose your license, your reputation, and probably most of the money after legal fees. We're giving you an out." For a moment, the only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock. I reached for my purse, the leather soft against my palm. Diane's eyes followed the motion. "What are you doing?" "I'm making a call," I said. "Before I sign anything." "You don't need to call anyone," Martin said quickly. "The decision's simple." I looked him in the eye. "Then you shouldn't mind if I take a minute." Diane's voice turned sharp. "You decide now, or we file by the end of the day. Those are your options." She was so sure the walls around her could hold, so sure the power stayed on her side of the table. I let my phone rest on the folder, but didn't unlock it yet. They started talking again, numbers, cases, warnings, but the sound blurred at the edges. Behind it, I heard something steadier, the quiet lessons from Maggie's study, the scrape of a chess piece sliding into place. Never interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake. I took a slow breath and straightened the papers into a neat stack, aligning the corners. "You're right," I said finally. "This is a big decision. I'll need 1 minute to think." Aaron groaned. "Nora." "Come on," but I'd already stood. My voice stayed even. "You've all had 6 months to prepare. I get 60 seconds. The younger lawyer reached for his laptop, muttering about drafting complaints, and Diane's hand tightened on the table. "You're not walking out of this room until we're finished," she said. "You can't just—" I didn't move toward the door. I only stepped back far enough to see them all clearly, the family that had taken me in, to fill a space, not to love me. They had mistaken silence for weakness. They always had. "I'm not walking out," I said. "But I'm not alone in this either." The words hung there long enough for confusion to flicker across Diane's face. Martin frowned, sensing something shift. The oldest lawyer tapped his pen against his folder, waiting for someone to take the next move. Outside the conference room, an elevator bell chimed softly down the hall. I felt the vibration through the floor before the door even opened. Diane glanced toward the sound, her lips parting as footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, the kind that didn't rush for anyone. I kept my gaze steady on her. "You wanted this handled properly," I said. "Let's make sure it is." The door opened behind me, and the room fell silent. The gray suit straightened instinctively, sensing authority, before it even spoke. A man's calm voice filled the space. "Good morning," he said. "I believe you're discussing my client's inheritance." The clock ticked once, twice. No one breathed. And for the first time in that room, it wasn't Diane who held control. The man in the doorway carried his authority quietly, the way seasoned attorneys do when they've already weighed the odds before speaking. His silver hair was neat, his briefcase worn at the corners, the kind of leather that had seen courtrooms and depositions for decades. "Good morning," he said again, and the room shifted almost imperceptibly. Even the three lawyers Diane had brought straightened their shoulders, unsure of where to look. Diane blinked first. "And you are—" He stepped forward with a faint smile. "Samuel Hart, senior partner at Hart, Redmond & Associates." He placed his briefcase on the table, unhurried. "I believe we're discussing my client's inheritance." Diane's confusion flickered to irritation. "Your client?" "Yes," he said calmly, meeting her gaze. "Nora Bennett." The silence that followed was sharp enough to hear the clock ticking above the door. Aaron's hand slid off the back of his chair. Brooke stopped pretending to check her phone. Even Martin lost that polished composure that made him look at ease in any negotiation. Diane recovered first. "That's impossible. Nora can't afford counsel, certainly not someone like you." Hart opened the brass latches on his briefcase with a soft click. "She doesn't have to. Mrs. Margaret Ellis retained me 2 years ago to handle any disputes related to her estate. Her exact words were—" He glanced at the folder before him. "When they come for her, and they will, I want her protected." The weight in that sentence settled over the room. Diane looked from Hart to me, as though trying to read whether this was an act. "You're saying my mother-in-law hired you. That's correct?" Hart said. "She was my client for over 40 years. He took out a file stamped with the estate seal and set it neatly before him. "And before we go any further, I should mention that this conference room is under audiovisual surveillance, as are all rooms in this building. I trust no one objects to having this discussion recorded." The lead attorney Diane had hired cleared his throat. "We have nothing to hide." "Excellent." Hart smiled slightly. "Then let's proceed." Martin leaned forward, irritation creeping into his tone. "Look, Mr. Hart, I'm sure you believe you're doing the right thing, but this matter is a family issue. It doesn't concern your firm." Hart turned to him with the patient politeness of someone who had handled men like Martin all his life. "On the contrary, Mr. Caldwell, this concerns my client's legal and financial security, and therefore it concerns me directly." He opened the file, sliding out a set of documents that looked thicker than anything Diane's lawyers had brought. Diane folded her arms. "My mother-in-law was not in her right mind when she updated that will. She was forgetful and easily swayed." Hart met her eyes, his tone still even. "I visited Mrs. Ellis personally several times in her final year. She was clear, articulate, and if I may say so, remarkably strategic. She anticipated this very conversation. I watched him flip through the pages with deliberate care, the rustle of paper filling the silence. He didn't raise his voice or grandstand. He didn't have to. Every movement, every pause carried quiet certainty. Diane tried again. "You can't just walk in here and derail a family agreement. We've already begun paperwork with counsel." "The documents you attempted to have Ms. Bennett sign," Hart interrupted gently, "are coercive and unenforceable. They would also, by their nature, violate the terms of Mrs. Ellis's trust." Aaron frowned. "Trust? What trust?" Hart rested his hands on the folder. "The irrevocable trust established by Mrs. Ellis 2 years prior to her death. It names Ms. Bennett as the sole beneficiary and includes specific protections against exactly this kind of interference." Brooke's voice rose an octave. "That's ridiculous. Grandma would never do that. We're her family." Hart turned to her. Mrs. Ellis made it clear that family to her meant the people who showed up when she needed them. She left a video statement to that effect. Diane stiffened. "A video, yes," he said. "A formal testament recorded in my office, witnessed by 3 professionals, her physician, a retired judge, and her parish priest." She wanted full transparency. The lawyers Diane had brought were suddenly quiet, their eyes flicking between one another. Martin tried to regain ground. "That video doesn't change the fact that this will can be contested. Courts overturn them all the time." Except Hart said, opening another folder, this one was prepared with that possibility in mind. It contains what's called a penalty clause. Should any member of the Caldwell family attempt to challenge Ms. Bennett's inheritance, the trust will automatically activate a $5 million damages provision payable to Ms. Bennett from the estate's remaining reserves. Diane's color drained. $5 million, that's extortion. No, Hart said, his tone mild. That's foresight. Aaron pushed back his chair. You can't enforce that. Hart didn't look up. You're welcome to test it in court. Mrs. Ellis's documentation includes signed statements, witness certifications, and verified financial audits. Every piece of it is admissible. The room seemed smaller then, as if the air had thickened. The polished table no longer gleamed under the lights. Even the reflections looked duller. Diane leaned forward, voice sharp now. This is outrageous. You're twisting her intentions. Hart finally looked at her. I'm not twisting anything, Mrs. Caldwell. I'm honoring them. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a small tablet. Would you like to hear from her directly? The screen came to life with a click. And there she was, Maggie, sitting in a high-backed chair, her favorite pearl necklace around her throat, eyes bright even at 85. The sound of her voice filled the room. If you're watching this, Diane, you've done exactly what I expected. Brooke gasped, and Aaron muttered under his breath. Diane's face went pale. Hart paused the video after a few seconds, giving her time to breathe or to collect herself, whichever came first. We can continue when you're ready, he said quietly. Martin stood, trying to salvage dignity. This meeting is over. Hart shook his head. Not yet. We still need to discuss the cease and desist order and the pending charges for attempted coercion. The older of Diane's 3 lawyers spoke up for the first time. Charges. Mr. Hart, this is a civil matter. For now, Hart replied. But as of 30 minutes ago, we have a complete audio record of your clients threatening Ms. Bennett's professional license and coercing her into relinquishing her inheritance under duress. That crosses into criminal territory. The lawyers exchanged looks again, silent calculations of liability and distance. One of them began closing his laptop. The oldest spoke quietly to Diane. Mrs. Caldwell, I strongly recommend we pause here. Continuing could expose you to substantial risk. Diane's voice cracked slightly as she turned to him. You're abandoning us. We're withdrawing, he said, effective immediately. When they left, the door shut gently, almost politely. The echo of it lingered longer than any argument could have. Hart closed the folder before him and gathered the unsigned documents Diane had brought. These, he said, sliding them into his briefcase, are evidence now. Diane stood so abruptly that her chair scraped the floor. You can't humiliate me like this in front of my own family. Hart didn't flinch. You did that yourself, Mrs. Caldwell. For a long moment, no one moved. Brooke's eyes darted toward the door. Aaron rubbed the back of his neck, and Martin's face had gone the color of paper. Hart's voice softened, then measured, but kind. Mrs. Ellis told me something during our final meeting. She said, I built a life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Make sure Nora learns she can do it too. I intend to keep that promise. He turned to me, his expression gentler now. Ms. Bennett, are you comfortable continuing? I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Good, he said, straightening his files. Then let's discuss the evidence Mrs. Ellis left behind. I think you'll find she planned every move with remarkable precision. The sound of his briefcase snapping shut marked the end of something, the ambush, the years of quiet endurance, the unspoken hierarchy that had ruled that house. But it also marked the beginning of something else entirely. Diane sank back into her chair, eyes distant, as if she were staring down a chessboard she no longer recognized. The pieces had shifted, and for once she wasn't the one holding the queen. Outside the conference room, the elevator chimed again. Somewhere below, people went about their ordinary Tuesday lives, unaware that on the 15th floor, a family's balance of power had just quietly changed forever. Samuel Hart's presence changed everything. The room that had been built for intimidation now felt smaller, as though the light itself had shifted sides. Diane sat stiff-backed, her fingers laced tight around each other, while Martin's polished calm began to fracture at the edges. Hart adjusted his glasses and drew a slim folder toward him. The quiet hum of the air conditioning filled the pause before he spoke. Mrs. Ellis anticipated this exact situation, he said, glancing down at the documents. She left detailed instructions regarding how her estate should be managed if any member of the Caldwell family attempted to interfere. Diane tried to sound composed. You make it sound like she expected betrayal. Hart didn't flinch. She expected a misunderstanding of boundaries, he said evenly, and she wanted clarity when that time came. He turned one page, his eyes scanning it briefly. Before she passed, Mrs. Ellis established a sealed record, notes, statements, and witness testimonies documenting her intent. Every change to her will was reviewed by 3 independent parties. Nothing was done in haste. Aaron leaned forward, his voice low but tense. You're saying she built all of this to keep us from questioning a single signature. Hart looked up. To protect the integrity of her choice. Yes, Brooke muttered. That's absurd, but even she didn't sound convinced. Diane took a slow breath. You have no idea what my mother-in-law was like at the end. She was confused, forgetful. She thought the nurse at her bedside was her own sister. Hart closed the folder, resting his hands over it. I was at her bedside the week before she died. She was not confused. He paused, letting the silence stretch. She spoke about each of you with precision, your birthdays, your careers, your temperaments. She was very clear about why she left her estate to Ms. Bennett. Diane's color deepened. Out of pity. Hart's tone softened but didn't yield. Out of gratitude. She said Ms. Bennett was the only one who showed her compassion without calculation. Martin broke in, then trying to steer things back toward logic. This isn't about sentiment. It's about fairness. That sum of money could support the entire family, not just one person who happened to move into the right bedroom at the right time. I looked at him across the table. The right bedroom. The words came out quiet, but the sound of them seemed to hang in the air. That room was a laundry closet until Diane had it converted for me. The right bedroom was never an option. Aaron rolled his eyes. We're not doing this again. But Hart leaned slightly forward. I think we are, Mr. Caldwell, because your aunt's decision was shaped by those very moments. She kept records of them, dates, receipts, statements of neglect. She knew they would be questioned later. Diane snapped, That's nonsense. My mother-in-law was always dramatic. She exaggerated everything. Hart opened another envelope, the paper inside crisp and white. Would you call this dramatic? He slid a copy of a letter across the table. It's her own handwriting, witnessed and notarized, dated 18 months before her passing. Diane hesitated before picking it up. I watched her eyes move across the page, watched the flush climb her neck. Martin leaned closer to read, but she folded the letter shut. This proves nothing, she said. It proves intent, Hart replied, and that's what courts care about. The tension in the room was steady heavy, like a drawn bow waiting for release. The second attorney, the youngest, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Hart, he said, perhaps we can resolve this privately. Surely there's room for negotiation. Hart gave a faint smile. The only room for negotiation was in Mrs. Ellis's lifetime. She left no such allowance. Diane turned toward me, then her voice cracking on the edge of anger. You think this is justice, Nora? Watching us be humiliated like this? I didn't answer. The years of silence between us were answer enough. Hart continued calm and measured. Mrs. Ellis's final months were well documented. She retained not one but 3 legal firms to cross-verify her estate plan. One of them was mine. Another was chosen specifically so there would be no conflict of interest with the Caldwell family's previous counsel. Aaron's hand slammed against the table. You're saying she planned all of this behind our backs? Yes, Hart said simply, because she wanted to protect the one person who never asked for anything. Brooke's laugh came out sharp and short. You make her sound like some kind of saint. She played favorites just like everyone else. Hart's eyes rested on her for a moment, then moved back to Diane. Mrs. Ellis's video statement will speak for itself. It addresses each of you by name. Diane's voice dropped to a whisper. A video. What kind of woman records her own family like a suspect lineup, the kind who wanted her words to outlast argument, Hart said. She made sure they would. He pressed a button on the tablet beside him and the screen lit up. Maggie appeared seated in her favorite armchair, light spilling in from the window behind her. She wore the same soft gray sweater she'd loved every winter, her pearl necklace resting just above her collar. When she began speaking, her voice filled the room, steady, clear, unmistakably hers. "If you're watching this," she said, "then you've done exactly what I feared you would." Diane's face went white. Aaron shifted again, but no one spoke. Maggie continued, her tone calm, almost kind. "For years, I watched you measure worth by convenience. I watched you teach a child to thank you for scraps and call it family. But love doesn't ask for debt. It gives freely." Brooke turned her head away, but the sound carried everywhere. Hart paused the video. "We can stop if you prefer." Diane shook her head quickly, eyes fixed on the screen. "Play it." Maggie's image looked straight ahead. "Nora has shown me what family really means. When my health failed, she didn't disappear behind excuses or schedules. She sat by my side and never once complained. She deserves peace. She deserves the chance to build a life without this family weighing her down." The footage ended there, frozen on her face mid-breath. The silence that followed was thicker than before. Diane swallowed hard and looked at Hart. She didn't understand what she was doing. She was manipulated. Hart closed the tablet and folded his hands. Mrs. Ellis was fully evaluated by 2 medical professionals and a judge before signing her final documents. All 3 affirmed her mental clarity. You'll find their statements in the trust file. Martin exhaled, his confidence draining away. "You really think a judge will side with this nonsense?" Hart's tone stayed mild. "It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of record." Diane looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "You knew about this," she said. "You were in on it." I shook my head slowly. I didn't know the details, but she warned me you'd try this. She told me to trust her plan. Aaron leaned back, arms crossed. "So, what now? You think you've won because she left a pile of paperwork." Hart slid the original transfer documents back toward Diane. "What happens next depends entirely on you. Mrs. Ellis left an option for reconciliation, if and only if her wishes are respected. If not, the trust's secondary provisions activate." Diane frowned. "Secondary provisions?" "Yes," Hart said. "And I suggest we discuss those after you've had a chance to think carefully." The words hung there final yet unfinished. He closed his briefcase again, the sound echoing softly in the quiet room. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Same room." No one moved until he reached the door. When it clicked shut behind him, the silence broke in uneven breaths. Diane looked at the empty screen, her voice small for the first time in years. "She was supposed to trust me." Martin rubbed his temple. "You left her no reason to." Aaron muttered something under his breath too low to catch, and Brooke stared at the tabletop, as if it could explain anything. I stood, the weight of the room lifting slightly as I did. "You have until tomorrow," I said quietly. "After that, everything changes." No one stopped me when I walked to the door. The hallway outside felt brighter, the air easier to breathe. For the first time that morning, I felt steady on my feet, like the board I'd been playing on my whole life had finally turned in my favor. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of what Maggie had planned. The next morning, the elevator doors opened onto the same marble hallway, but the air felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was expectant. I could hear the faint buzz of voices from the conference room before I reached it. When I stepped inside, everyone was already there. Diane and Martin sat close together this time, their confidence trimmed down to something cautious. Aaron stared at his phone, tapping the screen without purpose, and Brooke twisted her bracelet around her wrist until the silver links clinked softly. Samuel Hart stood by the window, his briefcase open on the ledge, sorting through a neat stack of papers. When he saw me, he nodded once. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett." "Morning," I said quietly. He turned toward the others. "Shall we begin?" Diane's voice came brittle but measured. "We were told this meeting would clarify things. So far, it's only created confusion." Hart set his glasses on the table. "Then let's clear that up." He pulled out a document embossed with an official seal and placed it in the center. "This," he said, "is Mrs. Ellis's irrevocable trust agreement filed in 3 states to prevent any jurisdictional disputes. It includes specific provisions that activate upon any attempt to contest her will." Martin frowned, leaning forward. What provisions? Hart flipped the first page over, his tone steady. First, a financial clause. If any family member challenges the inheritance or attempts to coerce Ms. Bennett into surrendering it, they forfeit their right to any residual benefits and become liable for a $5 million damages claim payable to the beneficiary. Aaron's hand froze mid-tap. Brooke's bracelet stopped moving. Diane's eyes flicked between them, trying to gauge which one might speak first. It was Martin who broke the silence. $5 million. That's absurd. Not absurd, Hart replied. Strategic. Mrs. Ellis liquidated several investments specifically to fund that penalty clause. Diane's voice wavered. She couldn't have? She did, Hart said simply. And she left a video record of the signing. He pressed play on the tablet again, and there she was, Maggie seated upright in her favorite cardigan, the chessboard visible on the table beside her. Her voice was calm, the tone of someone explaining a recipe she'd perfected. If you are hearing this, it means my family has tried to take what isn't theirs, she said. So let's be clear. I built my life by planning ahead, and I've done the same here. The penalty clause is my insurance that Nora won't spend the rest of her life fighting people who never fought for her. Brooke looked down. Aaron exhaled through his teeth, slow and uneven. Diane closed her eyes briefly, her hands trembling against the polished wood. When the video paused, Hart turned the screen back toward him. There's more, he said quietly. But before we continue, I'd like to remind everyone that this is being recorded for the estate's protection. Martin shifted. You can't threaten us with recordings. Hart's tone didn't change. The signs at the building entrance state that all conference rooms are under audiovisual surveillance. Your prior meeting was recorded in full audio and video, including the threats made against Ms. Bennett's nursing license. Aaron's chair creaked. You were listening. Hart looked at him evenly. I was in the building. My associate monitored the meeting to ensure Ms. Bennett's safety. Your mother-in-law predicted intimidation tactics. She was correct. The air went still again. Diane's complexion turned pale, her voice barely audible. You had no right. I had every right, Hart said. Mrs. Ellis's estate allowed me to intervene at any sign of coercion. He opened another folder and placed it next to the trust document. Now, if you'd like to see the evidence of financial discrepancies Mrs. Ellis discovered within Caldwell Holdings, we can discuss that next. Martin's jaw clenched. What discrepancies? Hart pulled a printed spreadsheet from the folder, the kind of document that looks harmless until you realize what it represents. During a private audit last year, Mrs. Ellis discovered unreported withdrawals totaling $680,000 from company accounts. The funds were disguised as consulting expenses. Aaron looked toward Diane in shock. Mom. Diane's lips parted, but no sound came. Martin sat rigid beside her, his lawyer's instincts fighting with the reality in front of him. Mrs. Ellis chose not to pursue legal action while she was alive. Hart continued out of respect for her grandchildren, but that leniency expired upon any attempt to challenge her will. Brooke spoke for the first time, her voice small. You mean she knew everything? Even before she got sick? Hart nodded once. Everything. No one moved. The sound of a clock ticking somewhere behind me filled the silence. Then Diane straightened in her chair, gripping the edge of the table. You think this makes you untouchable, Nora. Her voice cracked somewhere between fury and disbelief. You were nothing before this family took you in. You'd have been lost in the system. Hart lifted a hand. Mrs. Caldwell, I advise you to stop. She ignored him. We fed you, clothed. You gave you a roof, and this is how you repay us. I met her eyes calm but steady. You didn't take me in for kindness. You did it for the monthly stipend. Grandma told me. The words landed like glass breaking in slow motion. Aaron's face turned toward Diane, confusion mixed with something else, recognition maybe? Is that true? Diane said nothing. Hart's voice cut through the silence, measured and clear. Mrs. Ellis provided court records confirming that the Caldwells petitioned for custody, citing financial hardship. The stipend was intended to offset household expenses. Not once did she request reimbursement. Diane pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. This is a setup, she said. You're twisting history. No, Hart replied. Mrs. Ellis preserved it. He reached into his case one last time and placed an envelope on the table. Inside are certified copies of her final deposition and witness statements, one from her physician, one from a retired judge, and one from her parish priest. They all affirm her mental competence and her intent. Martin looked defeated now, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of facts he couldn't refute. Aaron and Brooke sat motionless, eyes fixed on the table, as though staring hard enough might change what they'd heard. Diane stood beside her chair, breathing unevenly, her voice no more than a whisper. "So this is it. You get everything." I took a breath before answering. "Not everything. Just what she wanted me to have." Hart placed one final document on the table. "Mrs. Ellis left a path forward," he said gently. "She included a cease and desist agreement. Sign it, and the matter ends here. No penalties, no investigations. You walk away with your dignity intact." Diane stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "And if we refuse, then the penalty clause activates," Hart said. "The IRS receives the audit records by Monday morning, and each of your professional networks receives copies of the deposition by Wednesday. It's entirely your choice." Martin's eyes closed. "You wouldn't." Hart met his gaze. Mrs. Ellis already did. The room stayed still long enough for the hum of the air vent to return. Then one by one they broke. Martin was first. He signed without looking up. Aaron followed his pen, shaking slightly. Brooke hesitated, tears filling her eyes, but eventually reached for the pen. Diane didn't move. She looked at the line where her name was supposed to go, the ink from the other's signature still wet above it. Her voice came thin and hoarse. "You think this will make you better than us?" I shook my head slowly. "No. It just makes me free." For a long time she didn't speak. Then, with a trembling hand, she signed. Hart gathered the pages carefully, his professionalism unwavering. "These are legally binding as of this moment," he said. "Any violation will trigger the full provisions of the trust." No one argued. As he packed the documents into his briefcase, I looked toward the tall windows. The city stretched out below sunlight, bouncing off glass and steel. Somewhere down there, ordinary people were having ordinary days, unaware that a lifetime of silence had just ended on this floor. When the elevator doors finally closed behind Diane and the others, the weight in my chest loosened. Hart turned to me, his expression softening. "Your grandmother was remarkable," he said. "She predicted every move they'd make." I nodded. She always did like being 3 steps ahead. He smiled faintly, then handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. "She asked me to give you this after today. Said you'd know when to open it." The paper felt heavy in my hand, as if it carried something more than words. Hart buttoned his coat and glanced at his watch. "You're free to go, Ms. Bennett. Take some time. The next step is yours now." When the door shut behind him, the silence felt different, no longer empty, but waiting. I looked at the envelope again, tracing the familiar handwriting across the front. Then I slipped it into my bag and walked out into the light of the hallway, knowing whatever came next had already been set in motion long before I arrived. I didn't open Maggie's letter right away. I kept it in the inside pocket of my coat as I rode the elevator down, the paper soft against the lining, a quiet reminder that the storm upstairs had passed. Outside, the afternoon sun was sharp on the glass buildings, turning everything to reflection. People hurried along the sidewalks, carrying coffee cups, talking into phones, living their ordinary days. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing air that didn't belong to that conference room. When I finally tore the envelope open that evening, it wasn't full of instructions or legal details. It held a single sheet, her handwriting steady and deliberate. "They never deserved you, my darling girl. Now go live the life you were meant to live. No legal language, no conditions. Just that." I sat at the small kitchen table of my apartment, the city lights flickering through the window, and read it twice before folding it carefully back into the envelope. The next morning I called Hart's office. His assistant put me straight through. "You've done the hardest part," he said. "Now you decide what comes next." His tone was less formal this time, more like someone who'd watched this kind of story too many times before. "Your grandmother mentioned you'd have plans for that inheritance. Something meaningful. I think I know what she meant, I said. Something that gives back. Then do it, he said simply. That's how you honor her. 2 months later, I stood outside a narrow brick building on the east side of the city. It used to be an old textile warehouse, 4 stories of dust and forgotten bolts of fabric, but I could already see what it could become. The faded letters above the entrance still read, Mitchell Textiles, the family name Maggie had built her first business under. Keeping it felt right. Inside, the air smelled like paint and new wood. The first floor had been gutted and rebuilt into wide-open rooms lined with medical equipment still wrapped in plastic. The sound of hammering echoed from upstairs, where electricians were finishing the last set of lights. I walked through the main hall with the project manager, a woman named Denise Parker, who'd been recommended by one of the hospital administrators I knew. We should be ready by the end of the month, Denise said, checking her clipboard. The exam rooms are done and the pharmacy's waiting on licensing approval. You'll need staff once we open. I already have some names, I told her. People who've worked with me before. Nurses who care about the same things. She nodded, scribbling a note. It's a good thing you're doing, Nora. When she walked away, I stood in the middle of what would soon be the waiting room. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, landing on the freshly painted wall where a plaque would hang, a simple bronze one that read, The Margaret Ellis Memorial Clinic. I could almost picture the people who'd come through those doors, families who couldn't afford care, mothers juggling 2 jobs, retirees who'd fallen through the cracks. The kind of people Maggie would have helped without hesitation. News about the clinic spread faster than I expected. The local paper did a small feature on a community health project funded by private donation, and though I hadn't shared details, people somehow connected the dots. The Caldwell family's name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Everyone who'd seen the headlines from the inheritance hearing understood enough to whisper. A week later, I got a call from Aaron. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity outweighed caution. His voice was quieter than I remembered. I just wanted to say congratulations. I heard about the clinic. Thank you, I said, waiting for the catch. I got demoted, he said after a pause. When word got around about the inheritance thing, it didn't sit well with my boss. Said it reflected poor judgment. I'm sorry that happened, I said softly. He let out a humorless laugh. I'm not looking for pity. Just wanted you to know I get it now. What we did, it looked terrible from the outside. It was terrible. I didn't say anything. The silence stretched until he spoke again. Mom's been quiet. Doesn't talk to anyone. Brooke moved back in with her for a while, but even she's getting tired of it. How's Martin? He's keeping his distance. Something about the state bar looking into him. They're calling it advisory misconduct. The words landed somewhere between sadness and inevitability. I hope things settle down for you, I said. They won't, he said plainly. Not for a long time. But you seem okay. I'm getting there. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Take care, Nora. When the line went dead, I set the phone down and looked at Maggie's photo on the counter. She was smiling in her garden, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I whispered, You were right about everything. By summer, the clinic opened its doors. The first morning, I arrived early to find a line already forming outside, parents with children, elderly couples, a few people I recognized from the neighborhood. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. We saw 147 patients that day, and by the time we locked up, the waiting room chairs were still warm from the crowd. Among the first hires was a pharmacy tech named Maria Ortiz. She was 24, newly licensed, and told me on her first day that she'd aged out of foster care at 18. I've been where a lot of these people are, she said. That's why I wanted to work here. Her steady hands and easy smile reminded me of the nurses who'd once trained me, patient and sure. I gave her the job on the spot. Each week brought more patients, single mothers balancing night shifts, veterans who'd been denied coverage, teenagers who'd never had a regular doctor. We started a small fund for prescriptions, using part of the inheritance Maggie had left, and soon donations began arriving, $10 here, $50 there. One envelope came from a local Girl Scout troop with $73 in cookie sale proceeds. Inside the note, written in green marker, were the words, "For people who need help from girls who care." The clinic grew into something I hadn't expected. Local businesses offered sponsorships. Volunteers stopped by to organize food drives, and a neighborhood church sent lunch for the staff every Friday. The walls that had once echoed with construction noise now carried the sounds of life's soft laughter, the beeping of monitors, the rustle of paperwork. 3 months after opening, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a personal check for $1,000 and a short note for the kids who don't belong anywhere else. The signature was Aaron's. I pinned it on the donation wall beside the Girl Scouts note. Later that week, I learned from an old colleague that Diane's company had lost one of its biggest clients, an account worth nearly $1 million a year. The rumor was that the CEO's wife had heard about the inheritance scandal and wanted nothing to do with it. Not long after Brooke's social media accounts disappeared, and Martin quietly retired from consulting. I didn't celebrate any of it. Consequences have a way of finding their own balance. What mattered was that Maggie's name, the same one they'd tried to erase, was now carved into the front of a building that would outlast every one of us. Some evenings when the clinic was quiet, I'd walk through the empty halls and pause in front of the framed portrait we'd hung in the lobby. It showed Maggie in her younger years, mid-laugh sunlight caught in her hair. Beneath it, the plaque read, "Love is the greatest inheritance." That line stayed with me even after I turned off the lights and locked the door for the night. Outside, the street hummed with traffic, and the city moved on around us. I stood there for a moment longer, thinking about everything that had led here, the years of silence, the fight in that marble room, the letter that had changed the course of my life. As I walked toward the parking lot, a soft wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of lilacs from the planter by the door. It was the same scent that used to drift through Maggie's garden in the spring. I smiled, letting the moment settle. Somewhere I could almost hear her voice, steady, certain, and proud. The lights of the clinic glowed behind me, reflected in the windows like a promise kept. And for the first time in years, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. The months that followed the clinic's opening blurred into long days and quiet victories. By late autumn, the Margaret Ellis Memorial Clinic had become part of the neighborhood's heartbeat. People waved when they passed, and the sign out front felt less like a plaque and more like a promise kept. One Friday afternoon, as the last patient left, Maria peeked into my office with a smile. "There's someone here to see you," she said. He didn't have an appointment. Before I could ask who, Aaron stepped into the doorway. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, and the confident posture he'd always carried was gone. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his own choices had finally settled in. "Hey," he said quietly. I nodded, motioning to the chair across from me. "You look tired." He gave a short laugh. "That's one way to put it. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." He glanced around the office at the framed photos on the wall, Maggie's portrait, the clinic's opening day, a snapshot of Maria and the staff smiling under a banner that read, "Free Health Fair." "This place is incredible," he said. "I didn't think you'd actually pull it off this fast." "Maggie did most of the pulling," I said. He nodded, eyes dropping to his hands. "I read about the clinic online. People are saying it's saving lives." I studied him for a moment before asking, "How's Mom?" He hesitated. "She's trying. The house feels empty now that Brooke moved out. She still talks about Grandma sometimes, like she's angry she can't argue with her anymore." I let the quiet fill the room. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "She asked me to bring this. I didn't take it right away." "What is it?" "A letter," he said. "She wrote it last week. I haven't read it." I reached across the desk and took it, setting it aside. "Thank you." Aaron shifted in his chair, uneasy. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for everything. I thought I understood what we were doing that day in the conference room. I didn't, not until I saw you standing your ground. I've been thinking about that a lot." "You can't rewrite what happened," I said softly. "I know, but I can do better from here." He stood smoothing his jacket. "If you ever need help fundraising volunteer work, call me. I mean that." He left quietly, and I sat for a while staring at the envelope on my desk. The paper was thick, the handwriting precise. I waited until the building was empty before opening it. "Nora, I've had too much time to think these past months. Anger was easier than regret, but regret finds its way in when you stop shouting. I won't pretend I was a good mother. I made you feel small because I thought control was the same thing as care. It wasn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you'll accept this as acknowledgement that you were always more than we let you be. Diane. There was no closing, no flourish, just her name. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same box that held Maggie's note. 2 women worlds apart, both shaping who I'd become. That night, I drove out to the suburbs. The Caldwell house looked smaller than I remembered the flower beds, untended, the porch light dim. I didn't go inside. I just sat in the car at the curb, watching the windows flicker with the glow of a television. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment, just distance, like a chapter that had closed long before I realized it. A week later, Hart called. I thought you should know, he said. The family has complied fully with the cease and desist. No further contact or claims have been filed. That's good, I said. There's more, he continued. The remaining assets of Mrs. Ellis's trust, approximately $1.2 million, have been released to you. She left a note with the final transfer. Would you like me to read it? Yes. He cleared his throat. You've turned pain into purpose. Let this help you grow it further. Do something beautiful, Nora. That's all she wrote. I smiled, tears catching unexpectedly at the corner of my eyes. She always knew how to keep it simple. Hart chuckled softly. She did. Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. You've honored her well. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at the framed photo on the wall, the one from the clinic's first day. The staff stood shoulder to shoulder, arms around each other, Maggie's portrait centered above them. The next morning, I called Denise and told her we were expanding. Within months, the second floor was converted into a free counseling center. By winter, we had a dental suite and a mobile unit serving nearby towns. Each project carried a piece of Maggie's handwriting, somewhere in it, on the dedication plaque, the grant letters, even on the mugs we gave to new staff. It felt like she was still here, steadying my steps every time I doubted myself. Then one cold January morning, I received a small package at the clinic, addressed in familiar script. Inside was a photograph, me and Maggie at the garden table years ago, chessboard between us both, mid-laugh. On the back, in faded ink, she'd written, "You always had the winning move." The message wasn't new, but it carried a meaning I hadn't seen before. Winning didn't mean defeating anyone. It meant surviving with grace, choosing peace when the world offered noise. Later that week, Aaron showed up again, this time with Brooke beside him. She looked different, tired, but softer around the eyes. "I wanted to see it," she said quietly, looking around the bright halls. "The place everyone keeps talking about." I gave them a tour showing the pharmacy, where Maria worked the new counseling offices, and the quiet rooms upstairs for patients in recovery. Brooke stopped at Maggie's portrait, her voice low. "She really did love you. She loved all of us," I said. "We just didn't always notice it in time." When they left, Brooke hugged me awkwardly, but genuine. Aaron followed his expression, lighter than it had been in months. "You did good, Nora," he said. The next few weeks passed peacefully. The clinic thrived, donations grew, and the city granted us recognition for community service. But the real change wasn't in headlines or plaques. It was in the people who came through those doors and left a little better than they arrived. One afternoon, Maria found me in the break room holding a fresh copy of the newspaper. "They wrote about you again," she said, laughing. "Front page this time. They're calling you the woman who built hope from inheritance." I shook my head. This wasn't mine alone. It was hers. Still, Maria said, pouring coffee, she'd be proud. I thought of Maggie then, of her voice, her calm, her unshakable way of turning pain into instruction. I thought of Diane's letter tucked safely away, and of the version of myself that once stood in a marble conference room, too used to being dismissed to raise her voice. That woman was gone. As the sun set outside the clinic windows, painting the brick walls gold, I walked through the halls one more time. Every echo, every heartbeat of the place felt like a quiet kind of justice, not loud, not cruel, just certain. In the lobby, I stopped beneath Maggie's portrait, brushing my fingertips against the edge of the frame. "We did it," I whispered. The glass caught the light just right, and for a brief moment, her smile looked almost alive. Outside, the evening traffic hummed steady and familiar. The city kept moving just as it always had, but for the first time, I wasn't chasing its rhythm. I was part of it. And in the quiet that followed, I understood what Maggie had meant all along. Winning wasn't about revenge. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away. A year passed before I realized how much had changed. Life didn't suddenly turn perfect. It simply became peaceful. The kind of peace that comes after you've told the truth, weathered the fallout, and found a way to stand steady anyway. The clinic was thriving, 500 patients a month, 10 full-time staff, and more volunteers than we could schedule. Some mornings I still arrived early just to walk the halls before anyone else. The quiet hum of the building always reminded me of Maggie, how her plans stretched beyond her lifetime, how she'd left something that would keep on giving long after her last move in the chess game was made. Diane never contacted me again. Through Aaron, I heard that she'd started therapy, the kind that peels back years of denial one layer at a time. He said she was different now, less combative, more reflective, but still guarded. I told him I wished her well. That was true. There was no bitterness left to carry. When you finally let go of needing someone's apology, you realize you don't need their permission to heal either. Aaron visited the clinic often after that, sometimes bringing donations from local companies or just stopping by to drop off coffee for the staff. He'd found a new job, smaller title, but he said it suited him better. Brooke worked at a nonprofit downtown, answering phones and helping with community outreach. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something steady, something real. Every once in a while, the three of us would meet for lunch. Conversation came easier than it used to, like we'd all learned how to talk without measuring every word. On the anniversary of Maggie's passing, we held a small ceremony at the clinic. The staff lit candles by her portrait, and we read letters from patients whose lives had changed because of the care they received there. One mother wrote about her son's recovery after an injury, another about being able to afford insulin for the first time in years. Their words filled the room with the quiet kind of gratitude Maggie always believed in, the kind that doesn't shout, just lingers. After everyone left, I stayed behind. The lights were low, and outside the windows the city shimmered in the soft blue of evening. I stood in front of her portrait, tracing the edge of the bronze plaque with my thumb. "We did it," I whispered again, like I had the first night the clinic opened. "You were right about everything." For the first time in my life, I felt completely unafraid of the future. The family that once defined me no longer held any power over who I became. I wasn't their dependent or their afterthought. I was the woman Maggie had seen all along, building something lasting from everything that tried to break her. Weeks later, Hart came by with one last folder from the estate. Inside was the final accounting, all trust matters resolved, every clause fulfilled. She'd be proud, he said, as he stood by the window watching the patients outside. "You've honored her better than most people honor themselves." I smiled. She gave me the map. I just followed it. He nodded, adjusting his coat. "That's what good mentors do. They light the way and let you walk it." Then he left, leaving me in the quiet hum of the lobby. That night I took the long way home through Maggie's old neighborhood. Her house had been sold months before, but the porch light was still the same golden hue she used to leave on for me whenever I worked a late shift. I parked for a while across the street, windows down, listening to the cicadas. Somewhere deep in the summer air, I could almost hear her laugh. Back at my apartment, I pulled out the box where I kept her letters, the one she'd written before she passed, and the one from Diane I still hadn't replied to. I read Maggie's words again, the same line I'd carried with me for months. "They never deserved you, my darling girl. Now go live the life you were meant to live." And I finally understood. It was never about money or revenge. It was about dignity, the simple kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone discount it again. Maggie hadn't saved me by giving me wealth. She'd saved me by teaching me how to use it for something bigger than myself. The next morning, the clinic's first patient was waiting outside when I arrived. An older woman with a small dog in her lap smiled as I unlocked the door. "You're early," I said. "So are you," she replied, grinning. We shared a quiet laugh before I let her in. Inside, Maria was setting up the front desk, humming softly to herself, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. It was an ordinary day, but to me it felt like everything had come full circle. Sometimes I still think about the girl I was when I first walked into the Caldwell's house with a garbage bag full of clothes and a hope she couldn't name. She wouldn't have believed this ending. But maybe Maggie did. Maybe she saw it the whole time. If she were here now, I think she'd remind me that real justice isn't loud or cruel. It's steady. It's the moment you stop chasing approval and start living by your own light. So that's where I'll leave this story. A nurse who found her strength, a grandmother who built a legacy, and a family that learned slowly what love is supposed to mean. Thank you for listening. If you've ever had to walk away from people who made you doubt your worth, I hope my story helps you remember this. Peace is the best kind of victory. Take care of yourself, and if this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over.